Hi, this is Barry, and welcome to the Simplicity Zen podcast. If you enjoy the podcast and would like to help spread the word, please like and subscribe if you are watching on Facebook. Also, if you feel motivated, please consider sharing a link to the podcast with friends or Sangha members who might be interested. Today, my guest is Jim Tabor. Jim is a longtime Rinzai Zen practitioner and a founding board member of the Korenji Rinzai Zen Monastery Foundation. He is one of the moderators of the main Rinzai Zen discussion groups on Facebook. In addition to Zen training, Jim has been a practitioner of classical Japanese martial arts for the last 30 years, including Aikido and Iaido. He currently holds the rank of Sandan, which is a third-degree black belt in Aikido. Currently, Jim is the manager of Crestwood Aikido, a dojo in south suburbs of Chicago. As part of his Zen and Budo training, he became a certified Zen therapy practitioner under founder Dub Lay in 1997. Thank you so much for being here today with us. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me, Barry. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Um, yeah, I've long enjoyed seeing your posts on the Rinzai Zen Facebook group, and I saw some of your interactions with Corey and his channel. So I was pretty excited that you're willing to do an interview with us today. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah. So, what is Iaido? I'd never heard of that before.
So it's pronounced Iaido.
Oh,
So
Iaido.
it's
Okay.
yeah, Iaido is it's a swordmanship school
Hmm.
through classical Japanese arts, and essentially it's the art is derived from cutting from the sword in the saya or the sheath.
Hmm.
So one movement, removing the sword from the sheath and cutting at the same time.
I see.
And there's a number of katas that are involved with that. It's very classical, very prescribed, but then there's also some partner katas that get pretty fun because you can get pretty intense with those. It's fun. It's a great art. I love it.
Hmm. Could you describe a little bit what Zen therapy is?
Yeah, so that's a combination of several different body work techniques. Mainly, I'd say it's most similar to Rolfing.
Okay.
But there's also some structural integration and some trigger point therapy as well involved with that. So it was designed by a gentleman named Dub Lay, who's since passed. But Dub was just a normal guy that was going through like a probably midlife crisis through some things that happened in his life, and decided to start studying Zen and body work.
Hmm.
And through those practices, he developed this body work that's called Zen body therapy or Zen therapy. And I was first introduced to it by my first Zen teacher, Tom Nagel, who would incorporate it throughout the Zen class that we had, and just show us little bits and pieces. And I was just amazed at the results that we would see by just everything relaxing, loosening. Sometimes traumas would come out, not necessarily in the small class that we did, but when I went through the actual training, it was pretty profound. And it's just helped me throughout my life in terms of correct body usage, and also being able to help other people too if they have an injury or there's some structural disintegration, be able to help integrate some of those things. And it's been a great practice as well.
Are you actively involved in it still?
No, I had intentions when I first went through the training years and years ago of trying to make a business of it, and I just never really got that off the ground. I was a young guy, I was getting married at the time, I had a new career starting, so I just never got it off the ground. But it's been really helpful just with students and also with just family members and friends, and being able to help them with different ailments and just my own health issues that I've had over the years. It's been really helpful in terms of being able to release things and fully integrate the body that we're always working on through these different arts.
Hmm. So is Aikido your primary profession at this point? Do you have a do you?
No, it's my main profession is social work. So I'm a social worker by day,
Mhm.
um, Aikidoka by night. But it's been my main martial arts for the last almost 30 years. Started in 1993, so it's been a long time. But uh, just recently started teaching at my own dojo, like you said, in the south suburbs here of Chicago. And it's great. I've always enjoyed the art, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to teach at Mato Moore's dojo when he had a dojo in Chicago. And even after he left to found Korinji, continued to teach at that dojo until I moved my dojo out here.
Hmm. So I'm going to ask a question that's probably going to sound maybe uneducated, kind of noobyish, but my loose understanding of Aikido, am I pronouncing it right? Aikido?
Aikido.
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 It sounds a lot like what I said, but all right. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I have sometimes I have a hard time with words, but so it seems like on one end of the spectrum there's Aikido, Aikido,
Aikido. The
Aikido.
do is stressed. Yeah.
Um, is very like soft and dare I say like kind of spiritual, and on the other end of the spectrum, it seems that it's more hard in style. Is that an oversimplification? Is there any truth to that?
Oh, there's a lot of truth to that.
And where are you guys on that spectrum?
We're certainly on the harder, I don't know, left or right, whichever side you want to say, but certainly I've been taught and I've always approached it as a Budo or a martial art.
Mm-hmm.
And the our kind of our catchphrase is, if it doesn't work, it's not Aikido. If it doesn't work, it's not Budo. People do use it as a spiritual practice, as a very gentle flowing practice, much like people might use Tai Chi that way, or yoga. I don't prescribe to that use of the art just because I've not been taught that way. And to me, it's martial art. If it doesn't work, like I said, it's to me, it's fairly useless to me. But if other people use it, or they find that it helps them live a more authentic life, if it helps them to connect deeper with themselves, I'm not going to judge them for that. But for me and my students, it's a martial art. It's a hard martial art.
Do you guys stress test at all? Do any sort of sparring or
Yeah,
resistance or anything like that?
yeah. So it's interesting. I have a couple students right now who are black belts in jujitsu. So every once in a
Japanese or
while,
Brazilian?
Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
Okay.
Yeah. And they, so generally not during class. We won't go full bore just because we have a lot of new students. But as people progress, we will certainly test each other. And with these guys, it's fun because we get to see what works and what doesn't. And it's humbling when you think that you're good at something, or you think you have a technique down, and it's just not working time after time. You have to really examine and go deeper into, why isn't that working? What am I doing wrong with my body? Or how am I not taking this person off balance? But we do traditionally in Aikido have an exercise called Randori, where it's a free attack, or Jiwaza, which is a free attack. And it can be kicking, punching, grabbing, strangling, and any attack that we can imagine. Weapons attack, empty hand defense against a sword or a staff or a knife. And then Randori is up to 6 attackers at once. So it can get pretty intense. In fact, we just had some tests yesterday. I was one of the person that tested, and I think I may have broken or sprained my finger pretty good, because it was fine yesterday. It hurt, but today the hand's really swollen up, so I have to go get it checked out. But it's intense. It's fun.
I remember I don't want to get too off track here, but I remember I took like an introductory course. I think it was a very soft like Aikido organization, and I remember they were showing me, taking me through a sequence, and I remember asking like, isn't this move entirely dependent on you not letting go of my wrist? Like, wouldn't someone really let go? He's like, well, this move was designed if the person's holding a sword, so they wouldn't let go of your wrist.
Right. Yeah. So some of the techniques, upon first viewing them, don't make any sense if people don't have a deeper understanding of the background of where the art came from, which is really a weapons-based art. And oftentimes a weapons-based art in which the person defending doesn't have a weapon. So going back to the old samurai days, you you have your spear and you lose that, it breaks. You have your sword, that breaks or you lose it. And you've gone through all your weapons, you don't have anything anymore on the battlefield, and a guy is charging at you with a sword. But you have to have some way to defend yourself instead of doing this, because you're just going to get cut in half. So it comes from a lot of that. But also, we do have counters to that. So if somebody grabs and we have a technique that we'll use, they don't necessarily have to continue grabbing, because we'll grab them back, or we'll do some other technique that doesn't require the hand that they're grabbing, or the hand that they're grabbing with, I should say, to be able to execute the technique.
So, Corey Hess and I were talking in our interview. Maybe it was in person. I think it was in the interview, where you were about the same age, and how like instrumental Star Wars was to our formation of our worldview and beliefs. And I think you're probably around our age, based on similar amount of gray hair. And so,
I'm 48.
yeah, so you're right in there. So I mean, was Star Wars, did it influence your interest in Zen or Aikido or anything like that?
Oh yeah, it still does. I still want to be a Jedi someday. That's the pinnacle of my training. But yeah, certainly. I remember as a little kid seeing these guys with lightsabers and doing these fantastic physical movements and being able to move things with the Force.
Mhm.
And I think what inspired me most by those movies was the teacher-student relationship. First with Yoda, and then you see, of course, the dark side. You have the Emperor and Vader, but there's always this teacher-student relationship is the theme through many of these movies. And the student trusting the teacher unequivocally in terms of what's best for them in their training. I think that really inspired me to start seeking martial arts and eventually Zen as well.
Mhm.
And yeah, just huge influence on me. Probably one of the reasons I like swords is because of lightsabers. When me and my brother were young, we would turn anything we could find into a lightsaber and have fights, and it was great times.
Yeah, I remember watching the movie as a kid, and I don't remember the exact line, but Obi-Wan Kenobi says something like, the Force is a created by and binds all life together, it flows through everything. I remember thinking like, that sounds intuitively right,
Right.
like that hit
Yeah,
that
there's
that I really think that somehow planted a seed that grew into the shenanigans I'm involved in still to this day.
right. Yeah, and the whole chivalrous part of what a Jedi Knight is, and their quest to be as pure as possible and to take care of those that can't defend themselves. And that
Mhm.
whole aspect of it too, I found really interesting and intriguing. And when I was a little kid, I was a short, little, fat little kid, and always getting picked on, always getting beat up. So I was always wanting to be the person that could defend myself, but also knew what it felt like to get picked on and to be the person that couldn't stand up for themselves. So to finally be able to find an art and also the confidence through that art and through Zen training as well, to be somebody that isn't pushed around easily or that can defend themselves or defend their loved ones or other people that they care for. I always thought was also really cool about those movies too.
Mhm. So, did you grow up in Chicago?
Yeah, I've always grown up in this area in the Midwest. We've always lived in the suburbs of Chicago. I never lived in the city, but yep, just a little maybe half-hour drive west of the city of Chicago is where I grew up for the most part.
Mhm. Did you have a religious upbringing, or more secular, or what kind of
Oh yeah, I did
things did
have a
you?
religious upbringing. So my parents got divorced when I was a fairly young kid. I was about 5 years old. So my mom grew up Lutheran, and my dad grew up Catholic. So on the weekends, I was with my mom. We would go to a Lutheran church on Sundays, and then the weekends I was with my dad. We went to a Catholic church on Sundays. So I got a little taste of both of those, and for the most part, we were pretty regular churchgoers.
Mhm.
I was one of those kids that wasn't really interested in going to church because I didn't want to. Liked Saturday and Sunday morning cartoons, and I didn't want to miss those. But as I became older, I started to, especially in the Lutheran tradition, you go through confirmation, classes through your seventh and eighth grade. which is actually where one of my daughters is at right now, which she absolutely hates. Because she doesn't like getting up early to go to confirmation on Sundays.
Hmm.
But through those confirmation classes, you would delve deeper into the Bible and the different stories and the different lessons from those stories. And I always really liked the parables that Jesus would tell. And I really got into those and just the lessons that came out of those. So I think that kind of sparked my interest in religion. And especially when I started studying Zen, we have all these Zen stories of all these guys and all these parables. And I really enjoy, those are inspiring to me, some of those old Zen stories.
So did I hear right? So your daughter, she goes to Lutheran church right now. So does that mean your whole family does, or?
No, so I got divorced about 7 or 8 years ago,
Okay.
and my ex-wife is Lutheran, so we both agreed that she should have some kind of a religious background,
Hmm.
whether she wants to pursue that going forward after she gets her confirmation as she gets older. But both my girls, I have a 20-year-old and a 13-year-old, and both of them went through confirmation class, and we've both felt, even though I'm not a Christian, we both felt it was important for them to have that background.
So
um
to balance their development, shouldn't you also have them set a 7-day session so they can?
I've tried. Actually, they both are pretty interested in Zen in terms of the intellectual study of it, not necessarily the physical study of it. But I have taught them both Susoku-kan, basically breathing, how to use your diaphragm to breathe properly, how to use proper body alignment when you're breathing. Um, because kids these days, at least I'm finding that they're really pent up with stuff, and there's a lot of anxiety in the world that they have to deal with. And especially my oldest she graduated the year of the pandemic, so there's a lot of angst with that.
High school graduation.
Yeah, I'm sorry, high school
Okay.
graduation. And so it was like the kids just,
Didn't get to walk and
yeah,
stuff.
it was essentially like, school's over, congratulations, don't come back.
Yeah.
So um yeah, so in terms of the balance of that, I've also done some of the mealtime choka, chanting with them, show them how that works and like what those actually mean. So it's been really interesting to incorporate some of the things that I do at home, and they'll hear me every morning chanting, and they know that when my door's closed, I'm sitting. So it's here. But at that age, I wasn't really, although my daughter's 20, at that age, I was certainly interested in martial arts and Zen. But when I was in 13, 14, um, I wasn't so interested in religion, or martial arts even at that point.
Hmm.
But I think just having that practice going on in the home is really important for the kids to know that there's some deeper aspect to life than watching Netflix and eating dinner and
Hmm.
all the things we distract ourselves with.
Hmm. Do you think there's anything from your childhood that kind of like set the seed for you, besides Star Wars, of course, like set the seed for later Zen practice? Like, did you have? I mean, were you unhappy? Were you having existential questioning? Like, was there anything like that?
Yeah, I was a pretty moody kid, um, and I hit a lot of that moodiness with humor. I was always the class clown.
Hmm.
Um, And as I got older, as I became a teenager, I'd say 15, 16 years old, when you start to kind of explore the world outside of um, the influence of your parents, you start to meet other kids' parents and other families, and you start to travel out into the world a little bit more. You start to see like, oh, there's more to the world than I thought. And I was pretty moody and full of angst as a teenager.
Do you think
And
it's
I
just
just
hormones, or was there a particular thing that was bothering you
No, definitely, some I didn't I was really angry with my parents about
for the
the way that
divorce?
the divorce, and never really resolved those things. So and there was just this underlying feeling that there was just more to life than going to work, making money, buying a house, buying a car. There had to be, to me, there was a deeper part of life that wasn't being I wasn't being exposed to, and I wasn't open to me. And it was like this underlying current that I couldn't shake. And so I started to explore some Eastern philosophy. I really started to depart from Christianity at that point in my life. My parents still made me go to church, but I had no interest in any of that stuff.
Did you believe in a higher, even though you didn't go to church, did you believe in a higher power to some sort?
I did at the time. I knew there was something greater than me. You know,
Hmm.
I felt small in the world. I felt that there was just things happening in the world that I couldn't understand,
Hmm.
good and bad. And I wanted to explore what that was. That was like, going back to Star Wars, the Force. You know, what's underneath or behind all this stuff that's going on, and wanting to get down to the bottom of that stuff. And so I started to explore, like I said, some Eastern philosophy stuff. And I think the first book that I got from the library was a yoga book. So there were a lot of poses that I would practice and things like that. But also there was the philosophical part of the physical practice as well that I found really interesting and resonated with. There's something in that that I thought, okay, this is I'm on the right path here. This is something that's really interesting to me. And I was always fascinated with Japan for some reason.
Hmm.
When I
Yeah,
would
me
see
too.
something, yeah, it's just a
I remember that
weird,
the Shogun miniseries when I was a kid blew my
yeah,
mind. Like it was
right,
like, I mean, that like that occupied headspace for maybe a decade after that or something, you know.
yeah. And so I would see Japanese things. You know, if we went to even though it's not Japanese, but like a Chinese restaurant, that Asian influence in the architecture and using chopsticks and just all of these things that I encountered, there was just such a familiarity with it,
Yeah,
for lack of
I
a better
totally get.
word.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
I'm agnostic about reincarnation. You know, I mean, because I kind of, unless I experience something, I remain agnostic. That's just kind of my nature. Like I
yeah,
and but I remember the the first time we think we went in a Japanese restaurant. I I felt like, oh, this is home. Like, you
right.
know, like I just like it felt like you said totally familiar. I
Yeah.
mean, eerily so, you know. So maybe I'm a little less agnostic than I think. I don't know.
Yeah, you might be. Who knows? We won't know till we're enlightened and we can recall all our past lives, right?
Right, there you go.
But yeah, so I kind of lost track of where I was.
Yeah, I'm so
With
sorry.
it. No,
Familiarity
that's
and
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, just and the Japanese samurai movies and just martial arts stuff was just so fascinating to me at that age. And so I wanted to do some martial arts really bad. Um, I just didn't explore it at the time.
Hmm. What age was that? Teenage?
Yeah, teenage years, till I was about 18. I was 18, and then I was going to Roosevelt University, which is a university in downtown Chicago, and there was a flyer on one of the student bulletin boards for an Aikido club, Roosevelt University Aikido Club. And I said, "Oh, uh, that sounds like a martial art. I want to try that." And the first meeting was just in one of the classrooms in the school, and it was a student of Mado Moore who was starting the club there, and so it was me and maybe 15 other people that went to this meeting, and Mado Roshi talked about Aikido and what he does, and he was a professional Aikido instructor at that time, and that's how I met him, and that's how I got involved in all this crazy stuff.
Huh, interesting. Was he a Zen practitioner at that point?
He was, but I didn't really know much about his background. In fact, I was much more interested in just martial arts than I was actually studying with him. But over time, I grew a great affinity and love for him,
Hmm.
just in training with him and the things that he taught me and all the different practices that he opened me up to. But I was just so stoked about doing this martial art, and it was a Japanese martial art. And
Hmm.
so everything we did was just, it was like coming home. It was amazing. It was just a great feeling.
Did what was his personality like at that time? What were your first impressions of him?
Very hard, very tough, but also had this underlying wit and humor about him
Hmm.
that I found really interesting and I really gravitated towards. Um, but yeah, our the first dojo that I started with was this old judo and jujitsu dojo in downtown Chicago on the third floor of this building. And the first floor was a Cantonese restaurant. And so this dojo was always smelled like Cantonese food. And it was an ancient dojo. I mean, I think it was from the 40s, or it was made in the 40s or built in the 40s, and
Mhm.
had this old canvas mat that would just tear up your feet and knees because it was like sandpaper.
Hmm.
Um, and because it's canvas, if we got blood on it, it would stain the canvas. And that's like, oh, there's my blood. There's that person's blood. And it was just a bunch of young, tough people
And this
in their
was Aikido?
this is Aikido, where he taught at several different dojos, but
And,
this is the one that I
and
was
this is unrelated to Mato's Aikido lineage, right?
no, no, this is Meido's Aikido
Okay.
lineage.
Okay, go ahead.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. So we would just train there and just train really hard and just beat the hell out of each other. Oh, it was so much fun.
Hmm.
But I'm kind of glad I found it early because I know my body can't take that anymore.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was a great art to fall into, and it gave me an outlet and a path for life that I didn't have before. So I was this really just introverted, angry, moody kid, and I was suddenly open to this art that was basically saying like, "Shut up, get to work. Your anger doesn't really. It's not about you. It's about the way that you're interpreting the world." And this art allowed me to kind of wrestle with some of that stuff and express it, and eventually resolve all that stuff
Hmm.
through the martial arts and also through Zen training as well.
In retrospect, looking back, do you think you were having any kind of initial experience of samadhi or flow through the martial art?
Um, yeah, maybe. There were certainly times when I'd say probably not the first few years at all. First few years, you're just learning how to move your body properly and trying to remember techniques and getting over your clumsiness as a human being. But
Hmm.
as you start to integrate proper body movement into your daily life, and you start to integrate some of the lessons of non-attachment and letting go and not being stuck, you certainly get into a flow state or a samadhi state while you're training.
Hmm.
Um, or you start to recognize when you're not. So if you're really getting stuck, especially it's most apparent when you're doing some kind of a test. So there's a lot of different testing that we do in Aikido, and yeah, the nervousness or the um, the fear of just testing and failing really showed me like, oh wow, I am not centered at all right now. So it
Hmm.
was almost more of pointing, being able to pull the veil back a little bit of in terms of when you to kind of maybe shine a light is a better word
Hmm.
on all of your flaws, and just being able to work through those things and kind of have a path or a way to work through those flaws.
Hmm. Quick digression about flow. I saw a recent paper, or I saw a paper recently that was interesting. And their conclusion was that if something's too easy, you don't go into flow. If something's too hard, you don't go into flow. There's like a middle ground where it's not too far beyond your abilities. Because if it's too easy, you're daydreaming. If it's too hard, you're like, how do I do this? But
Yeah,
there's like a middle ground where there's a real balance between difficulty and ease where flow is possible, like from a
yeah,
physical action standpoint.
right. And I think there's some truth to that, but I think a lot of it comes from having some proficiency in whatever it is that you're trying to get into a flow state or some ID state. So
Mhm.
whether that's sitting or that's chanting or that's doing swordsmanship, whatever that is, if you don't have any proficiency, you're not going to be able to get into that. So I think that there's some truth to that, that there's that middle ground where you need to have some proficiency, but at the same time be able to shut off this thinking mind so that the whole body and mind work together to be able to achieve whatever it is you're trying to achieve.
Mhm. So how did you get it? So was Zen your first meditative practice? Did you do something else first, or how did you get into
Um,
it?
First formal and taught by an actual teacher, somebody that knew what they were doing. But before that, it was just books.
So you would
Trying
sit on
to
your own?
I didn't even do sit. I didn't even really know what Zen was.
But did you do any sort of meditation?
Yeah, some breathing exercises, and try to lay on my bed or on the floor and do some breathing exercises. But really didn't. This is like being thrown into the ocean, not know how to swim. Just had no idea what was going on.
Mhm.
Didn't even know if I was doing it right.
Did you read? Did you have any encounter with Zen from books or anything like that before you learned it from a
No, not from a Zen standpoint, but from Aikido. I was like devoured martial art and Aikido books like crazy.
Mhm.
And of course, Aikido comes from a spiritual background. O Sensei, who is the founder of Aikido, Shinto guy, but also has some splatterings of other spiritual disciplines as well, but mainly Shinto. Um, and through a lot of his writings and some of the other earlier guys in Aikido, talked a lot about ki, or
Mhm.
talked a lot about divine, not necessarily God or heaven, but like divine spiritual practice. That's the ultimate goal of Aikido, which I'm still trying to reach.
Mhm.
But yeah, so through those books, I think that I found a lot of that kind of stuff.
Mhm. What's your opinion of ki? Do you think it's a real physical energy? Do you think it's a metaphor? Do you Is it
It's
an energy? Is it a state of mind?
it's interesting talking about ki, because ki is the second syllable of Aikido.
Mhm.
So what I've always been taught through my teachers, especially my Aikido teachers, that it's really nothing special. It's about using your body properly.
Mhm.
It's more of a physical relaxation with intensity and intention, rather than it is like the force shooting ki out of my hand. So we were never really allowed to perseverate on what ki is. Rather, show me good body movement, show me good technique, and that will express ki in that way.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's never been something that I've tried to overanalyze too much. In
Mhm.
fact, I was just showing some students last week this exercise in Aikido that we have called unbendable arm, in which that you show a student that you extend your arm out and just use physical strength, use as much muscular strength as you possibly can, and you can bend the arm easily.
Mhm.
And then if you relax and extend, and the metaphor we use is like water coming out of a fire hose, um, that it's still flexible, but it's still very strong and has direction.
Mhm.
And when people experience this for themselves, they're blown away, and they usually start thinking like, "Well, this is magic. I've mastered ki." And I'm like, "No, no, you just learn to relax your body. That's all it really is." And that's really the part of the exercise, is to learn to relax with some intensity.
I
Oftentimes
like
when
that.
we,
Relax with some intensity. I'm gonna steal that.
yeah, feel free. I didn't make it up. I'm sure I stole it from somebody myself. But even like sitting, we think intensity is like, I'm sitting really intense. And like, as you know, that just doesn't work. You have to let the body relax. But if you, I think, especially in our culture, you think of people think about relaxation as laying on the couch, relaxing, when from a Budo or from a Zen standpoint, relaxation is using your body properly, proper integration in
Mhm.
terms of how you can move properly, how you can sit properly, how can you breathe properly if if your abdominal muscles are tense. Um, you have to be able to relax all that, but there's that fine line between relaxation and tightness that you have to find.
Mhm. So I can't remember if I think you mentioned Budo. It's certainly in your introduction. Can you define Budo and what you think its relationship is to martial arts, and then into Zen, if at all?
Yeah, so in my Zen lineage, is handed down from Amori Sogen Roshi, who um, his style of Zen was Zen Ken Sho. So there's the Zen, and then Ken is the physical culture and martial arts in his case, and
Mhm.
Sho would be the calligraphy. He was a master at all three of those. So I'm very fortunate to have fallen into this lineage where there's Zen, there's martial arts, and then there's also the fine arts of
So does the
calligraphy.
physical have to be martial art? Can it be
No,
yoga
no.
or qigong or
Yeah,
rock climbing?
yeah, exactly. It's any kind of physical culture that integrates all three of those things.
Mhm.
So I'm a musician originally as a young guy, and then I was a professional for a while. But even just so I was a drummer, so it was a very physical instrument.
Mhm.
But even just using that as physical culture sometimes, and trying to integrate proper breathing, proper body movement, relaxation while I'm drumming, um, it's physical culture there.
Mhm.
But he certainly, from his background, he was a swordsman, so we have a lot of um, tradition in our, or I should say, in our tradition, we use martial arts quite a bit.
Mhm. So Budo, though, specifically, like how would you define it
So that's, there's
in your
martial arts.
context? You don't necessarily
Oh,
have to do like a global universal definition, but
oh, sure.
so your
So it's,
relationship to Budo, what is it, and what's its relationship to Zen and
oh,
martial
sure.
arts?
So martial arts could also be called martial way. So integrate or using the martial arts to inform every moment of your life. That's a so Budo. So Do is a way. So using the martial art to, like I said, inform every moment of your life, integrating the way that you move, the way that I'm sitting, the way that I grab the coffee cup. How are those actions, or the way that I speak to people, the distance that I'm speaking to somebody, my tone of voice, my all of these little like minutia are informed by the martial art.
Hmm.
And every moment, so one of the things that I was taught as well is every moment is training. um, Whether it's a good day, a bad day, at work, at home, sleeping on the mat, playing with my kids, every moment is training. So that to me is Budo.
Hmm. I was just at a 1 day session yesterday at Green Gulch Farm, and Kokyo Hinko, he's a Soto priest. I was watching, and I was kind of seated where I could watch all his actions at the altar when we're doing ceremonies and stuff. The equivalent of choka in your um, tradition. And I was just really impressed at how he's just so there for everything he's doing. I mean, just like to the point where it's almost physically palatable.
Mhm.
He was just so completely engaged with just every activity he was doing. It was really motivational to me, and I think that kind of speaks to what you're talking about.
Is he a martial artist?
No. Mm-mm.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he's a probably 40 years in practitioner. So he's yeah.
Yeah. And I think at least I see it in, so I've been also blessed that all of my Zen teachers have been great martial artists as well.
Hmm.
So we've always been able to connect on that level too. And yeah, but when you see somebody with that kind of power in every single thing that they do, that to me is really what I'm always searching for, what I'm always aiming for is how can I integrate the Zen training, the Buddha training, the fine arts training into a more fully integrated human being.
Hmm.
And everything that I do, how can I make that as refined as possible with great awareness of what's going on in the room, with presence of mind, like you're talking about. So those are the things that over time I've been focusing on more as I become older and realize that I'm not 22 years old anymore and I can't go hard balls to the walls anymore. How can I refine all of those movements, whether it's Aikido, whether it's cutting vegetables, whether it's typing on a computer, throughout all aspects of life? How can I refine those things to the most um, perfect and efficient manner possible?
Hmm. Cool. So you imagine you heard about Zen through your Aikido lineage. Can you kind of paint a picture how you heard
Yeah.
about it
Yep.
and what your early experiences were like?
Yep. So I started Aikido training in 1993, and about 2 years in, 2 or 3 years in, um, this guy Tom Nagel, who's also an Aikido practitioner, was also a Zen guy, and so he started doing a sitting group in kind of a Zen class after one of the Aikido classes, and I would say see these guys setting up the cushions and starting to warm up as I was leaving the dojo. And one day, Mato Roshi said, you should stay for this. This would be good for you. And I said, okay. So I stayed one day, and Tom went through a bunch of stretching exercises. He kind of went through belly breathing with us, teaching us how to get the breath down into our belly, how to relax the solar plexus.
Can I actually interrupt? I'm so sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Apologize. So I meant to ask a question I'm going to ask because I think it would fit well with where we were in the discussion. So were you guys, did you guys work on hara at all in Aikido?
Yep.
Can you
Talk about hara a
that?
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So talking about the hara quite a bit, talking about the tanden, all of those things. Really, that's the basis for the power and movement in Aikido. It's all hips.
Mm-hmm.
It's being able to use your center, your lower half of your body to move this person to get to this other person's center. So yeah, I was already familiar with a lot of those concepts and how to do those things, but we never really had, specific breathing exercises that we were
Mm-hmm.
taught. Mainly it was just throwing each other all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And do it from your hara.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So anyway, continue on with the
Yeah,
narrative.
good.
So
That's a good question. That's a good
yeah,
segue into this too, like you said.
yeah.
So anyways, I stayed for the class. So Tom showed us how to sit, proper, body alignment, how to use the cushions.
And
And
Tom a like a authorized Zen teacher, or was it kind of informal?
informal. I don't think he's I don't think he ever got Inca.
Mm-hmm.
But he was one of our senior Zen guys at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So he had asked our main teacher, Toyota Sensei, if he could teach this Zen class. And of course, Toyota Sensei was a Zen practitioner as well, and said, of course, get those guys on the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were a core group of us that started sitting. And the first time I sat was amazing. I saw these colors, the floor was swirling. I thought, this is it. I'm enlightened now. I've found the way.
Are you sure he didn't dose
And
you with LSD?
let's say it again.
Are you sure he didn't dose you with LSD?
That's what it felt like. Although I'd never done LSD before, but it was just the most amazing, peaceful experience I ever had. But I never had an experience like that again. Or
Yeah.
maybe I shouldn't say never again, but it was a long time before I experienced any kind of like phenomena like that.
Interesting.
I know that we try not to give much credence to certain phenomena that rise up as we're sitting. The older I got, the more I realized, though, that's really not important. It's just phenomena coming up. But it really hooked me. Basically, is my point, is that it really hooked me into that practice. And so from there, I became a pretty avid sitter. I would sit every day. And then Tom would also, we had a whole curriculum of Hara training exercises that Tom would go through that came over from Chosenji over in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're doing all kinds of things where you're ki-eyeing, that's where you're yelling, and you're trying to yell from the bottom of your being and try to get the breath out in a way that's powerful. It's not coming from the throat, it's coming from down in your hara. And all kinds of other exercises, walking on each other's bellies and trying to ki-eye at the same time. And it was really great introduction to Zen, much different than anything that I've seen in terms of Zen training at other, it just essentially like a Soto or a temple someplace else. Mainly we do, you do your sitting. You might get an introduction from the Roshi, you might get an introduction from like a senior student. But this was like, I'd call it a Zen class, because we would do half of the hour we were doing sitting, the other half we were doing all these other hara exercises, which really integrated with the Aikido stuff. So to me, it was like they were both a great complement to each other.
Do you think Omori Roshi invented this stuff, or do you think it was a tradition handed down to him? Do you have any idea the history of it?
I don't. I know that obviously he didn't invent.
I mean, or did he synthesize it himself? What?
Yeah, I think he did.
Yeah.
I don't know the history of the actual curriculum all that much,
Mhm.
But I know that he did, like you said, it's kind of synergize these three ways of practice: the Zen practice, the physical culture, and then the fine arts.
Mhm.
And like I said, just a dumb kid in the Midwest that kind of fell into this amazing tradition, and it just feels
Mhm.
so blessed and lucky to have found it because it really saved my life. I mean, and I was I wouldn't say that I would have done something rash but I just wasn't a productive person. I wouldn't have been as a productive person as I
Mhm.
am today if I hadn't found this training.
Mhm. Can you parse out what was from the Aikido and what was from the Zen, or was it is it all kind of mixed up in your head?
No, it's all,
Very
to
good.
me, it's all training. I know that Mater Roshi himself will say, martial arts are great, but it's not Zen training. And I see them all as being training. It's, to me, it's just everything's training.
Mhm.
Um, the same state of mind that I should have on the cushion, I should have on the mat when someone's attacking me. The
Mhm.
same state of mind I have doing shoto is the same state of mind I should have when someone's attacking me. So, like, to me, there should be this flow from one moment to the next in terms of state of mind and using these practices to cultivate that.
So I'm going to say a word that I've never said out loud before, so I'm probably going to mangle it.
Okay.
But I was reading this book. It actually was started off as someone's master's thesis. Like I think he was like a sociologist or something, but he went to Japan and he basically hung out at Sojiji, which is one of the two Soto Zen training monasteries. I think for like a decade, and just like plumbed the sociological depth of this
Mm.
organization and the training of the monks and how the lay people interacted and so forth. Anyway, he has like an entire chapter on like paraphrasing a little bit. He said, most people see, meditation as the main task of a monk, but his kind of thesis was that it was actually Shugyo. Am I saying that right?
Shukyo,
Shugyo.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever said that word out loud before. And and when he would talk to the monks, he'd say, what is it you're mostly learning? They would all say Shugyo. That, and the teachers would say, we're teaching our monks Shugyo. Like that was the primary theme of what they were going through. Um, in their essentially ascetic training as monks. Do you think that flows at all with what you're talking about now?
100%. Yeah, I would say that if there's anything that I practice, it's Shugyo. Yeah,
Mm.
Shugyo is the deepest um, level of spiritual and physical training that one can undergo, is
Mhm.
essentially the definition. And we've defined it as like forging a sword. So you take this chunk of metal that's fairly useless, and through forging it in a fire and hammering it and quenching it in water and repeating that process, is very much like the way that we train as human beings in this tradition, is continually diving into the fire and hammering yourself and getting hammered, but then
Mhm.
having this rest period that you can let the training absorb into your bones. um, and I kind of lost my train of thought there, but
Shugyo.
oh, and essentially, yeah, essentially through that forging, you take this chunk of metal and it turns into this elegant weapon that's useful instead
Mhm.
of being just a chunk of metal that doesn't have much use at all. And to me, that's a great metaphor for the training that we do, is that we start as these kind of rough, worthless chunks of human beings, and through this forging process, through Shugyo, you refine all that stuff, and you
Mhm.
refine who you are in the world, and how can you be of use to other human beings in the world. Like, to me, that's the pinnacle of the training. Isn't It's great to forge oneself to have a better life or to be a better person, but how where do you use that training in the world with other people? How do you integrate that in terms of the service of other people?
Yeah. So that would relate it to the Bodhisattva vow. How would you correlate that to kind of cessation of suffering? Kind of the Buddha's original kind of motivation.
Yeah, I mean, essentially what I was saying is that um, you know, our vow as bodhisattva is to become enlightened as quickly as possible to save other human beings and to save all sentient beings, I should say.
Hmm.
Um, And I think that we often intellectualize that, once I do this, then I can do this. But it should be all at the same time. It should be as I'm continuing to refine myself, and as I'm reaching and grasping for enlightenment, I'm helping other people at the same time.
Hmm.
And kind of goes back to what I was saying about when I sit at home or when I chant at home, or just your vibration. If you can carry that training into your daily life, your vibration will affect other people, whether
Hmm.
they know it or not, whether you even know it. And as you continue to hammer it yourself, and it's, to me, it's very motivating. And I kind of had this shift um, uh, 10, 12 years ago, that I realized, like, this training is not, I'm way too selfish with this training. It was
Hmm.
always about, I want to be a better person. I want to be a better martial artist. I want to be a better Zen practitioner. But it's more of, I want to be a better Zen practitioner for the benefit of other people.
Hmm.
And I think that at some point in our training, we have to have that shift, or else the training becomes very stagnant and like very selfish, like I said.
Right.
So I think that vow is so important as we continue to ripen as practitioners.
Hmm. Um, Great. So back to the narrative aspect of it. So you were taking these classes where it was zazen and kind of key work. Um, how long did you kind of stay with that teacher doing those practices before you kind of moved on to the next stage?
Yeah, so I don't know, 4 or 5 years maybe we did that.
Hmm.
And then through that time, we also did sesshin at our branch temple in Chicago, at Daiyu which is still in Chicago. So we
Seven
would go
days.
there.
How long were the session?
No, these were shorter. These were like a Thursday night till a Sunday morning.
Hmm.
And
Which is plenty.
and Tom, what's that?
Which can be plenty.
Oh yeah, yeah. As a young guy, not knowing
Yeah.
anything about sesshin, he said, Tom said, "Oh, come to sesshin," and we mainly did half-hour sits at the most, maybe 45 minutes.
Hmm.
One, and I wouldn't sit much longer than that at home. I'd sit 20 or 30 minutes at home. Um, and didn't know anything about the meals, didn't know anything about chanting. So all of that stuff was a huge surprise. And I said, "Well, what's sesshin?" He's like, "Oh, it's like what we do here, but it's, you'll live at the dojo for a couple of days and you'll stay there." So he really downplayed the severity of it,
That's funny.
which was probably for the best, because if he would have told me how tough it was, I would probably wouldn't have done it. But I remember sitting there probably Friday morning, Friday afternoon or something, saying, "What the hell did I get myself into? This is terrible." And the only thing keeping me from leaving, because I was in so much pain, was the fear of leaving and getting yelled at.
Hmm.
So I stuck it out. But it was, it wasn't like, some people talk about their first session, they have these wonderful openings and these wonderful experiences. And it was the opposite for me. I thought, I'm never doing that again. That was horrible. Why would anybody torture themselves like this?
Hmm.
And everything was so new and foreign in terms of like the way we would eat meals and the way that you were woken up. And the chanting was terrifying to me. There's all this stuff going on, and these guys are chanting, and I couldn't keep up. I'm reading the book and trying to keep up, and there's bells going off, and the Makugyo's going, and I just thought, I don't know if this is for me. This is it was very intense.
Hmm.
But then um, something happened. I don't know. As time went on, it was like I looked forward to it more and more. I was like, "Oh, sesshin's coming." I said, I think I'll do it again." So I think just it was the fear, or I shouldn't say the fear. It was just the shock of that diving into that kind of training.
How about
Um,
did you have physical pain sitting for so long?
oh, absolutely, yeah, it's terribly. I thought my legs were going to crack in half at my knees. I thought for sure I was going to die. Um, but yeah, I stuck with it, and still practicing today.
And did you have do you guys call it sanzen or dokusan? What do you guys call it?
Yeah, we call it either one,
Uh-huh.
Dokusan or Sanzen.
Did you have it at that session? Was that your for in your?
No, I didn't.
Hmm.
In fact, I didn't even know what the hell they were doing.
Hmm.
I saw
Just
these people,
run away and then come. Where's
you
everyone
know,
going?
you, the Jiki yells, "Sonic!" And everyone runs. I shouldn't say everyone. There were a couple of people that didn't run because they weren't doing Sanzen. And I just sat there and I was like, oh, what the hell? What's this? So I almost got up, and then the Jiki, I don't know, somebody said, sit down, stay there. I was like, okay. So at that point, I had not done any kind of koan work. It was all just breathing and counting my breaths. And then in 2005, maybe, I started training with Sozan Milaroshi and started doing koan practice with him. And then from there, and I'd already been doing sesshin for quite a while. So I started doing Sanzen with him.
Did he start you on core? Oh, sorry. Did he start you on Mu or a different core?
He did, yeah. Started me on Mu, and had no idea what the hell I was supposed to do with that. And I've realized over the years that I was a very poor and terrible Zen student, because I was not able to hold that koan with me throughout the day for years and years and years, and just really struggled with keeping it present with me, throughout the day and at night and as I slept. Just not a good Zen student in that sense.
Yeah, but I guess you got to the point where you could start to hold it.
Oh yeah, yep. And that was really kind of a neat feeling, like, oh, okay, so this is how this works. And so just trying to figure out and kufu and wrestle with that that process was really eye-opening to me, because I just struggled for years and just wondering, like, what am I doing? What's wrong with me? Why can't I get this?
Why'd you stick with it?
I knew there was value to it. I knew that there was something I could see in my teachers and other advanced practitioners, that there was a depth to their being that I wanted really bad. And so I just thought, just keep hammering away. Through my musical training and then through my martial art training, I knew that this kind of stuff doesn't just happen overnight. I knew that it wasn't going to be like, bang, you got it. I knew that it was going to take a lot of effort and a lot of time. And I was comfortable with that. I was comfortable with realizing that and being patient and knowing that this is going to take some time. You just have to really absorb into it.
So could you talk a little bit about resolving Mu to some degree and kind of entering that gate?
Yeah. So I'd say the last year or two really have dug in fact, longer than that. Maybe the last 6 or 7 years really dug in and sitting a lot and really wrestling with Mu, and finally getting through that gate, and now working on some checking and capping phrases with that. But to me, I was expecting like this big, like, boom, like, there's Mu, boom, there it is. It was more of like, instead of like an explosion, it was more of like a sunrise, more of like, oh, but that's what it is. And
did you have any sense of like dropping a burden or a resolution or anything like that?
not really. Yeah, it's been a very soft kind of opening. Yeah, because I hear about these experiences people have with their first koan and Mu, and like all of a sudden it's a shift, boom, immediately. And to me, it was a much more of like a fade into this, and that's probably why I'm still checking some of those things, in terms of trying to be sure that I have really grasped it. So I'm sure I still have some work to do on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost cliche to say, but I mean, there is no one correct path. I mean, everybody has their own karma and causes and conditions, and and I think a lot of times, like the dramatic experiences can kind of almost be like, it's such a shock to the system. Whereas if if you've been practicing steadily for a while, there's some kind of pre-leakage coming in where the resolution is like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
or,
I have had some experiences, even before I started koan practice, where one specific, probably the deepest or like the most profound experience I had was when I just maybe a year or two into sitting, all of a sudden I felt like I let all of this anger from my parents drop away. And I felt like I was breathing for the first time on my own. It was just amazing. and just tears for hours, just coming out of my eyes. It was really profound. And I suppose if I had been doing koan training at the time, maybe that was some kind of a passing of something, but I
Hmm.
was just doing breath counting. But I think that those, and I've had a couple of other of those experiences throughout my training, um, that weren't even related to a koan at all.
Hmm.
That just these releases that the body goes through. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, so that's how you're supposed to breathe. So that's how the body's supposed to work. Yeah, just working through that stuff in a physical way, just awesome. Just
Yeah.
and to me, it just really kind of verifies the training that we do and brings a lot of validity to it. And I guess probably continue to inspire me to train and realize like there's something going on here that I don't understand, but I know that it's good for me and I should continue to do it.
Yeah. I really think the outside world really doesn't understand how much of a physical practice it is. I would say it's primarily a body physical practice,
Oh, absolutely. And
you know.
it's funny when you tell your family or your friends or your coworkers that, oh yeah, I'm going to go on the Zen retreat for the weekend or for the week or whatever it might be. And they say, oh, come back, relax. It'll be, go enjoy yourself. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's not how it works.
Yeah.
It's maybe in our twisted minds, it's enjoyable and there's some relaxation to it, but it certainly is not easy. That's certainly not fun in terms of, maybe now as I've gotten older and I train more and I'm more used to the forms, it's more fun for me because I get to play with those things in terms of
Mhm.
session and practice and really see where I'm at with those different forms.
It's funny. I have physically have a really hard time sitting, and I always have. And I mean, even a 30-minute set would be painful for me. And 7 day sesshin was just hell.
Hmm.
I mean, worst pain I've ever felt. And I've had kidney stones and broken bones and stuff, and doesn't come close to the pain of sitting through, you know, sesshin. But it got to the point where I was actually starting to have nerve damage maybe 5 years ago
Mm.
or so. So I switched up my sitting first a Seiza bench, and now I have a kind of like custom made big fluffy cushion.
Mm.
And so for the first time in my life, I have kind of minimal pain in sitting, even during retreats. And I just started experiencing something new, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Kind of, I guess I always mess up this pronounced shamatha, the relaxation aspect of,
Hmm.
like that was never really part of my practice.
Mm.
Yeah, people talk about it, and I just like, what, this is a war, like,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's been interesting, and it got to the point where it's like, not too infrequently, I'll just like fall asleep sitting, which is would have been unthinkable through
Mm.
most of my Zen practice. Um, I mean,
Right.
like,
Because you're in so much pain. How could you possibly fall asleep?
yeah, or even if I was in pain, there's just an intensity to it, and yeah. But once I was able to actually physically relax on the cushion a little bit, like a like if I get a good night's sleep, I won't fall asleep. But if I'm tired and
Yeah,
it's an extended retreat, like I'll just fall asleep sitting there.
yeah,
But it's
yeah.
weird. Like I'll wake up and I'll still feel like I was doing zazen even though I was sleeping. It's a really weird thing. I'm not sure fully wrapped around my head what's going on there, but
Right.
yeah. Anyway, sorry for the digression. Um, so how did you? So eventually became a student of Meido Roshi.
Yes.
So was that deep into your practice, or pretty early in, or
That
kind of?
was just this past year.
Okay.
I was a student of Sozan Miller from 2005 until he just retired last year,
Hmm.
last late summer, early fall.
And he was in the Chicago Zen Center, or what's it called, or
Dayu Zenji.
Zenji, and that's in Chicago.
Yep. Yeah, it's still there. One of his Dharma errors is now the abbot there.
And who is
But
that?
that's Ed Brand, and I don't remember Ed's Dharma name.
Okay.
He'll have to forgive me.
Okay.
But he's the successor there. Um, but so I talked to Miller Roshi and asked him, well, what should I do next? And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, in terms of my training, like who should I train with next? And I said, well, Maeda Roshi's, he and I have known each other since I was 18. I was always one of his Aikido students. And he said, well, you're on, you're connected to Korinji already through the board. He said, why don't you just train with him? And I said, okay. So I talked to Maeda Roshi, and he was very grateful and very accommodating in terms of taking me on as a student. So just started training with him earlier this year.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
How is his style different than your previous teacher?
It's hard to say because I've known Maeda Roshi for so long, and he and I have been friends for so long. And they both Sozan Miller and Maeda Roshi, they grew up in the same lineage as well, and so they're very similar. They're both martial artists. They're both intense guys.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the most intense people I've ever met.
Mm-hmm.
And I have only gone to Maeda Roshi for Sanzan one time so far. So I think time will tell in terms of how they differ, but I've known both of them for so long, it's almost hard to distinguish at this point. I'm sure they have their own styles that I'm not quite aware of yet, but as time goes on, I'll know.
Mm-hmm. And have you made it up to a sesshin there?
Yeah, so we did. It was more of a Zen beginners retreat that I was up a couple months, month or two ago, just because I need to get up there. Right now it's Seikon, so there's no sessions happening until April. So I'll go up in April. But yeah, so that's when I did Sanzan with him for the first time. And that's the first opportunity I've had since he became my teacher, my Zen teacher, I should say.
Cool. So could you talk a little bit about how you got on the Korinji board and what that process was, starting that up and so forth?
Well, that was interesting because he came to us, to me and a couple of the other Aikido students in 2005 or 6, something like that, and said that it was our collective teacher, Toida Sensei. It was Toida Sensei's dream to have a rural Soto in the Rinzai Zen tradition somewhere in the Midwest. And so Maeda Roshi took it upon himself to make this dream a reality. And so he approached me and a couple
Was
of
this prior to him having Inca, do you know?
Yes.
Or afterwards?
Yes. So I think it was a couple years before before he got Inca. I could be wrong. I think it was just maybe a year or two before that, that he formed this board, the Korinji Foundation. And so we started to talk about doing some fundraisers to start to create a cash on hand to be able to buy some land for the foundation to be able to start building. So it's really, every time I'm there at Korinji, it's just, I look around the place, and I remember going up there the first time just to see the land. And it's these beautiful ravines and hills and not one flat part of land. And I thought, and he was really excited when he brought us up there. He said, you guys got to check this place out. It's perfect. And we went up there, and I thought, how in the hell are we going to build anything on this? There's nowhere flat to build anything.
Did you verbalize that? Did you verbalize that?
I said, how can we build anything here? And he said, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. So we did. Basically, everything's built. The residence is actually kind of built into one of the hillsides that was dug out. But the actual Zendo is on pilings. It's built on pilings. It looks kind of like this. It reminds me of what I imagine the Ark would look like Noah's Ark. It's just a huge structure that just comes out of the forest. And,
so you guys are all set for global warming then?
Hopefully it floats.
Yeah.
But it's it's amazing to go up there and just look at the place and realize that 10 years ago none of this was here.
If I could remember from my interview with Roshi, you've had no big benefactors. It's all been grassroots funding, right?
Totally. Yeah. We've not had anybody that said here's $20,000, here's $30,000, here's $500,000. It's all been small, except for maybe, 5, 6, maybe a group or a person donated 10 grand, but I don't, it's very few and far
That's
between.
still, I think, within the realm of grassroots. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, and
San Francisco Zen Center, they've gotten grants of like six figures and higher,
right. No, nothing like that yet. But it's a fairly new Soto. So we're hoping that as time goes on, we're actually starting a capital campaign right now,
Mhm,
with some really talented people that are much more skilled in fundraising and capital campaigns than any of us are. I mean,
mhm,
it was just a bunch of martial arts dudes and women trying to make this happen, and just through the sheer will of Mato Roshi and his just constant hard work, that it actually materialized. So it's just incredible that it's even there,
mhm,
and that people from all over the world have come together to put the place together. I mean, we have people that have made donations and contributions that aren't Zen people at all. They'll never visit the place. They have no benefit. It doesn't benefit them in any way other than to know that this place exists,
mhm,
and that it's a legit Soto in the Rinzai tradition, in a Mori Sogen's tradition, that will continue hopefully for lifetimes after we're gone.
mhm. Very cool. So the last thing I wanted to touch on with you before you go. So you're a moderator on the Rinzai, kind of the main Rinzai group on Facebook,
Right.
and it's it's very heavily moderated, which maybe slows down the amount of content, but generally the content's pretty high quality, I'd say. Like, have you learned anything like just about the Zen world through moderating that? Like, do you have any interesting insights or?
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
the guys that are the moderators that I get to hang out with virtually through our messages and just discussions about the group. Those guys have lifetimes ahead of me in terms of their Zen practice and their knowledge and depth. I've learned so much about just everything Zen from those guys.
Mhm,
Um, and also um, some really great discussions, and we've all become really great friends, and they're some of my closest friends and brothers in terms of training and Zen, and just such an affinity with all of them. It's just really incredible group. But in terms of the things that I've learned, I feel like the young Padawan amongst the Jedi Knights with those
mhm,
guys. It's
mhm.
like
Are you gonna
these
grow the
guys.
braid, or
It's yeah, maybe I've got the long
you
hair going at this point.
you need to have the braid? So.
Yeah, I got that. But yeah, just it's like walking among giants with these guys in terms of their skill and their background and their knowledge of Buddhism and Zen, and they're just there's great people. And in terms of moderating, we really do our best to moderate so that whatever's posted is the most helpful to people.
Mhm,
So there's some things we won't let through just because we feel like, or we think that it's not going to be helpful, or it's just perseverating on some things that aren't going to be helpful to anybody else. But then we'll let some things through that we feel like, oh, this will lead to a good discussion. It's always the question is, will this lead to a good discussion for people,
mhm,
so that other people learn from all this
mhm.
stuff? um, and we curate quite a bit, but it's always very careful and always very intentional. And sometimes we'll talk for a day or two about a post
Mm.
and kind of go back and forth about what we should do, and we don't always agree, and that's okay. And that's what the moderators are there for, is to make sure that whatever's posted is the most beneficial to the folks that are part of that group.
Cool, very cool.
Yeah.
Will you send me a link to your dojo?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I'll post it in the description.
Perfect. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, and just a reminder, if people listening, if they're into this and they want to help promote um, the podcast, if they could like and subscribe on YouTube. I know that's always awkward to ask for that, but it actually makes a huge difference in the algorithm of getting out there. And also, you can go to simplicityzen.com and sign up for the mailing list there. And some people have reached out to me through there, and that's always fun. So, anyway, thanks so much. Really appreciate the
Oh,
time.
Thank you, Barry. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Looking forward to continued interaction. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.